Welcome, Bronco Nation. My game review for Boise State versus UNLV. Boise State Broncos at home destroying the UNLV Rebels 56-31. A massive blowout on the blue that will have ramifications not just for this season and Boise State's hopes of going to a Mountain West title game, but also going forward into next year, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Welcome into Horseshoe Spirit Studios. Make sure you check out a bottle of Horseshoe Spirits liqueurs. Must be 21 or older to consume at any liquor store in the southwest of Idaho. The perfect drink to celebrate a win, to console you after a loss. Hopefully you don't have to do that again the rest of the season out. But either way, make sure you pick yourself up a bottle for your next tailgate or watch party. Again, not just a look at alcohol, but great tasting as well. Must be 21 or older to consume. We're going to go through the offense, the defense, the special teams, look at how Boise State performed in each of those areas, grade each of those areas, and then we're going to look at how Boise State performed against my keys to the game, and then summarize going forward into next week. Now, like I said, this was a huge win, not just for this season. This is a massive win just for this year because it does two things. One, it sets Boise State up in the driver's seat to go to the Mountain West Championship game. They still have some challenges. Fresno State, San Diego State, neither of those will be easy. Even Utah State looks like it could be tough potentially, but UNLV was one of the biggest hurdles and the only undefeated team, the only team that you didn't truly know what they would look like, the only undefeated team on the record for Boise State to beat, and they are now one step closer to their number one goal of making a Mountain West Conference game, Mountain West, and winning a Mountain West title game the last season in the Mountain West. The second thing, though, it does for them this year is that this puts some validity behind the brand that is Boise State football this season. Obviously, it has not been the year that Boise State fans have wanted, opening up in non-conference in two big games, USF and Notre Dame. Neither of those results going how Boise State wanted them to, or Boise State performing the way that fans would have wanted them to do. So even if it was going to be a loss, not showing up in those games in a way that represented the brand very well. And so you were looking at this Boise State team and saying, are they good? Are they bad? Maybe they're not elite, but where do they fall on the scale underneath that top tier? Maybe they don't look like they're a playoff winner per se, but where do they fall beneath there? Because it's a wide spectrum of teams' performances between the very top, between the Notre Dame type teams of the world, and between the, anybody in Conference USA type teams of the world. And so where does Boise State fit in there? You had a couple of wins against New Mexico and App State and Eastern Washington and Air Force, but none of those teams look very good. UNLV was the benchmark. This was when we were going to walk away and know that Boise State was at a certain level. Now, this game is going to be hard to analyze the effects of until towards the end of the year when UNLV has done more on the back end of their season. They have a very, very easy schedule this year, which is part of the reason they were 6-0. So this could be a program that Boise State's going, wow, we just beat the team we play in the Mountain West Conference game, or it could be a 6-6 program. I mean, literally, that could be where UNLV goes the rest of the season. It is so tough to tell right now because based on everything they put up before, everyone's going to say they're on fraud alert now, and deservedly so. But I think this game showed more for Boise State that while they're still hard to say, are they a top group of 5 team per se, they are certainly a program that is competing at the top of their Mountain West Conference this season and is a team that can show up for the big games. And the pressure is on, exceed the expectations of the fan base and of Vegas, and put a great performance and a great defensive, we'll talk about that here, performance against a very explosive and dangerous UNLV offense and answer all of UNLV's offensive opportunities. And so we have learned quite a lot about this team, not as much as maybe you would want to, because it will depend on how what UNLV looks like the rest of the year. But we learned a lot about where this program truly is, and where they truly are is they are a good program that is highly competitive, even dominant against the best teams in the Mountain West. And hopefully that is something that can give Boise State fans some confidence going through the rest of the stretch. Now, I said, we're going to get into actually reviewing the actual results of the game itself. But one more discussion point on looking at the impact of this matchup. Not only is this a huge win for this season, but going forward into next year, when you have the Pac-12 rebranded, new teams without UNLV, UNLV is going to be a thorn in the side of Boise State and the rest of the Pac-12 programs. They just have more opportunity right now than really any other team in the Mountain West. And the Mountain West is giving them more resources and opportunity to set themselves up, set UNLV up as their flagship going into future seasons. And so when you are competing, because whatever you might want to say about the Pac-12, it is not a Power 5. When you are competing against the rest of the group of 6, the Mountain West, which is going to be easier schedule than really anybody in the AAC or Sun Belt or even Pac-12 is having to deal with, the UNLV sets themselves up as a great contender to be able to blow through an easy schedule and potentially compete for that New Year's Six or for that CFP slot. Well, now Boise State getting this win, exiting the way they did, this is a great head-to-head comparison match between one of the best teams left in the Mountain West versus New Pac-12. It is a huge win for the Pac-12, and it is a big win for Boise State when you're looking forward into the future. So, fantastic result. Again, one I said wasn't predicted necessarily by a lot of people, but there were a couple people that were close, namely the closest this week and the winner of the score prediction challenge for the Ashton Genty drawing at the end of the season. The winner of each week will be entered into a pot to be drawn at the end of the year to see who wins the jersey. The winner this week is Leslie Bingham 16, predicting Boise State 55 versus UNLV 27. So only 1 point off of the offensive score for Boise State and only 4 points off of the UNLV score. Fantastic prediction. Threw in a couple other things. Wasn't right in everything. I had the yardage wrong for Max Madsen, but also said 4 touchdowns for Madsen, which we did see, and 2 100-yard rushers. Well, if you kind of stretch that a little bit and say one 200-yard rusher, well, then pretty close to that prediction as well. So fantastic job, everybody in the comments. Please make sure you're giving your comments on this video as well, your own thoughts on this matchup, the impact of this matchup, and where this changes potentially your perspective on where this team sits this season and what the end results of this year might be for this program. Well, let's get into looking at the offense and reviewing the offense, the defense, and special teams. Starting off with the offense for Boise State, this was a very strong performance. Now, it is a UNLV defense that coming into this matchup was giving up close to something like 445 yards per game. Yeah, so coming into this matchup, UNLV's defense was giving up 445 yards per game. Boise State, though, still had a fantastic performance against this UNLV defense, far exceeding that number by over 100 yards, 558 yards. And a lot of that was due to a second half monster performance by Boise State, in a big part aided by Max Madsen. In the first half for Boise State, only 101 yards passing. Boise State ended with 264 yards passing. Yes, 11 of that coming on a fake pass by the punter. But for Max Madsen, who really struggled in the first half, you could see he was still trying to overcome, I think, some of that funk that we saw versus Notre Dame, and really didn't shake off much versus New Mexico. Ended that game on a positive note, but still shaking off that funk. It showed in this first half for him. Couple of bad passes, trying to hit Caples early on, couldn't do it. Couple throws right into the dirt. Targeted him twice on the first drive, and on the second pass, he was wide open. Probably would have been a touchdown. Instead, throws it into the ground. Caples unable to go and make that touchdown score. And so Madsen really struggling. He had some nice throws too, which we'll talk about here in a moment, but really struggling overall, only 101 yards. Well, in the second half, he had 152 yards total passing, and he got his running game involved as well. Really turned things around in the second half. It was a big part of this Boise State team being able to pull away. And so a quarterback who has been criticized and should continue to be so based on past performances. One really good game doesn't erase poor performances from the past. It's definitely a give and take. But he stepped up in this matchup. Is it enough to prove that he's the quarterback of 2026, that he can go out and beat an Oregon and get us back to the CFP? I'm not saying that's necessarily what we saw in this matchup. What we did see was Max Madsen finding a way to overcome, again, first half adversity and come out with a dominant performance in the second half and prove that he can step up when the pressure's on him the most. He really seemed to get his moxie back there in the second half. Had a really nice throw to Marshall that kind of sparked things for him. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But overall, Max Madsen, a very, very strong performance versus UNLV, who he has traditionally done quite well against. Yes, it is a forgiving UNLV secondary that allows something like 260 yards passing per game or something like that, somewhere in that number. But overall, for Max Madsen, stepping up strongly in this game and being a big part of Boise State being able to go out and succeed. 14 for 23 for 253 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. Again, first half, not second. 4 rushes and 23 yards. But the story of this game, the story of this matchup wasn't Max Madsen. It was Dylan Riley. Dylan the Jet Riley, 201 yards rushing. Only the 14th Boise State Bronco to rush for 200 yards or more in a game. 201 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, 13.4 yard average. He only touched the ball 15 times and had 201 yards rushing. Amazing performance by Dylan Riley. When we looked at his recruiting tape several years ago when he was recruited, I said he reminded me of a young DJ Harper, and he still does. But some of those runs, and I know that this is going to be the cliche comparison. It's kind of like when you see a quarterback play well and you compare him to Kellen Moore. But some of those runs were starting to look a little Ashton Jeanty-esque. The way that he would squirt out of that hole, coming off stiff arms and keep on trucking. There was one run specifically in the second half where he just popped through the hole, juked a couple guys, stiff armed a defender, and was one tackle away from breaking like a 70-yard touchdown. And it was just so close that it looked Ashton Jeanty-esque, and obviously not quite there because Jeanty would have broken it all the way down. But he was that, you start to see him really coming into his own. A player that I've been excited about since he signed with Boise State. Again, was hyping up in the commitment interview. I know Gaines and Dylan Riley in the same class, and I was excited about Gaines' potential, but Dylan Riley really excited me in that class. Looking at his high school tape, very, very exciting stuff. The speed obviously popped right off the board. You saw that today. He's not just, a Devin Demas type speed back. He also has power and elusiveness, really coming on strong, and you couldn't ask for a single player on this team to deserve something like this, who's worked through so much, obviously in the offseason and everything else, to come through and have a game like this, 201 yards and a touchdown. Amazing performance for him. A couple of long 40-plus yards, a 65, 64-yard run there in the first half. Incredible game. Cyrus Gaines, also a solid game for him. 6 carries. Boise State wasn't necessarily handing the ball off a ton in this matchup, just like they weren't throwing the ball a ton in this matchup, but each of those plays was explosive. That's something that we have missed from Boise State this season. Coming into this game, we really hadn't seen a ton of explosive moments. Now, obviously, Dylan Riley has had explosive moments, Keeley versus Air Force, but you didn't see that consistently throughout the game, throughout an entire team. Maybe one player would go off and have a big game, or you'd see a couple of small explosive moments, but overall, it was kind of a boring, methodical, predictable offense. Not today. Not only did Boise State's players step up and have huge games individually, but Nate Potter called the game of his life. An amazing performance by Nate Potter. You can see him starting to develop his own confidence. That's a big part of this. The players can only do what they're allowed to do by the offensive coordinator. Nate Potter, obviously a brand new guy, rookie in his offensive coordinating skill set coming into this season. It took him a while to do, two things. One, develop his own confidence in his own play calling, but also to develop confidence and rhythm with the players that he had. I mean, he was raised up under Cutter last year, really calling an offense for Ashton Jeanty. And so this team has been finding itself out. Potter has been finding himself out, but he shone so brightly in this game, gave his players the opportunities they needed to explode. Great. We'll talk about it a little bit more detail when we go through each of the drives here, but an incredible performance overall by Nate Potter, mixing it up between the run and the pass, and not just calling kind of those vanilla type plays, not necessarily trick plays truly per se, a halfback pass, or, what you would kind of expect is more kind of the funk a little bit overall, but just disguising some normal offense, end around a wide receiver type stuff, but disguising it in a way that was really, really brilliant. They said that Nate Potter's an offensive genius. We didn't necessarily see that coming into this game. This matchup showed that. This gave me a new perspective of what Nate Potter can do and my confidence in what this offense is capable of because of him the rest of the year out. Incredible performance. We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail when we go through the drives. But just kind of wrap up with the playmakers here. Sherrod wasn't really super involved too much in this game running or receiving, but he did have 2 receptions and his first receiving touchdown for Boise State there in the second half. And then the other players, though, that really stepped up in this game, somewhat caused by the absence of Ben Ford, who went down early in this matchup, very, very early. I believe it was first quarter, goes down. Second drive goes down hurt. Only the 1 catch for 26 yards. So he has been kind of that safety blanket for Maddox Madsen. He's who he's looked to predominantly. They have great chemistry. I've loved what I've seen out of Ben Ford, but him going down forced Maddox Madsen to look outside, to kind of read the defense a little better and look at other options versus just kind of having that comfortable, I'm going to go to Ben Ford if there's nothing open type play. And the players that really benefited from that were Chris Marshall and Cam Bates. Chris Marshall has stepped up and come on strong every game as he's grown throughout this season. I really liked what we saw versus Notre Dame. I thought we saw a lot of big type moments versus New Mexico, and I also had a couple of drops in the wet that kind of slowed him down, but he has started to pick up consistency. Well, today, Chris Marshall, 3 receptions, 96 yards, a touchdown, and he had the most incredible catch I have seen on the blue since the days of Shakir. So, it's been a few years since Shakir was here. An amazing catch, a 45-yard reception all through the air, lays out with a defender who is holding him. I mean, it was egregious pass interference. The defender straight up grabs and then pushes him as the ball is coming down. He dives, catches it, pins it against his head, just sells out, no protection of the body whatsoever, sells out through a hard hit on the ground, doesn't draw the ball loose, doesn't even move, and he's able to make the catch. And that really sparked Maddox Madsen. That happened early on there. I got to find myself here. In the second half, that was in the second half, drive number 2. And that really sparked Maddox Madsen, having that kind of big play moment where he put a ball out in a 50-50 type opportunity, and a wide receiver went out and made a play on the ball. Really, I think, brought some confidence to Maddox Madsen. Next drive, he had a 25-yard scramble where he went out and sought out a hit, which you don't necessarily love to see, but you do love to see Maddox Madsen starting to get his mojo back. And that catch by Chris Marshall really showed that, and that could be just a harbinger of things to come the rest of this season out. That there's some chemistry developing there. He caught every pass that was thrown to him. His first catch was not necessarily an easy one. He was wide open, but it was a little bit behind him. He caught it, and he still turned it up, about 25-yard reception. He caught every pass thrown his way. He had no bad drops, and he is stepping up in a way that I think gives Maddox Madsen confidence, and maybe we can see that take Maddox Madsen out of the position of being just too reluctant to force the ball into a situation, which takes away from his ability to be an explosive playmaker. It's great when you have a game manager, but when you need someone to be an explosive playmaker, you need someone who's confident and willing to take the right risks. Now, you don't want someone who's just throwing the ball into coverage a lot of times that we see from Maddox Madsen, but you want to see someone who is willing to take the right risks. Man, that is a tongue twister there. Willing to take the right risks, who knows that if he gives his receiver a chance, they will go make a play for him. And that right there, what Chris Marshall did today. Later on, he came back from kind of getting his breath knocked out of him and had about a 32-yard touchdown, about 17 through the air, about 15 yards running, really fought for the end zone. Him stepping up in this manner gives not just Boise State another weapon, but could potentially unlock an aspect of Maddox Madsen's game, which we really haven't seen since maybe 2 seasons ago when we saw it in those kind of desperation type moments that he was put into. So he had a huge game. Cam Bates, though, when Ben Ford went down, Cam Bates became more of a primary target. And Cam Bates, 3 receptions, 54 yards, a run for 36 yards for a touchdown, and a brilliant play call, which we'll kind of go over a little bit more detail here in a moment. But he played great, and actually he should have had like a 75-yard touchdown pass, but unfortunately, Maddox Madsen left him a little bit short. He had to come back for it, made the catch, but it should have been like a 75-yard touchdown. But he has stepped up in a big way. He is a player who I was so excited about last year. He played a lot as a freshman, tons of speed, former quarterback and wide receiver for his high school team. He is a explosive, dynamic playmaker. We've seen what he can do on the leg. They've used him in that Titus Young end-around type role, but he is also an explosive receiver as well, and he is starting to step up in a big way. I am liking what I'm seeing out of these wide receivers starting to develop, and this was the perfect type of game, not against a nobody, not against an FCS opponent, not against one of the worst teams in the Mountain West, but versus the front runner, not just for the Mountain West title, but probably the Mountain West team with the best chance of getting to the CFP, which the referees certainly knew today, and you could tell with how they were calling this game. That side note to the edge here. This was against a good team, and to see players stepping up this way, again, gives, I think, this offensive coordinator, this quarterback, more confidence to go out and be explosive against other teams down the line. Massive performance across the board. And then obviously Latrell Capel's also a great. Finally, Maddox Madsen found him, and he had a reception for a touchdown there later in the first half. So we're not going to go through every single drive overall, but the trend of the first half, like I said, Maddox Madsen struggling, the running game bailing him out. But Boise State in the first half had 206 yards rushing. So the first half of this game, they finished with 294 yards rushing. In the first half, 206 yards rushing. So Maddox Madsen only 101 yards passing, but 206 yards rushing in the second half. It wasn't that the running game was just being so explosive. They were stopping the running game, but Maddox Madsen stepped up when he was needed to, and put up 152 yards passing against only, what's that mathematically rise, about 89, 88 yards, whatever the math is. But anyhow, about 88 or so yards rushing in the second half. Maddox Madsen stepped up. But in the first half, the trend was Maddox Madsen struggling, but the running game helping him out. Keeley, of course, Dylan Riley just absolutely exploding in this first half, having on the very first touchdown, Dylan Riley a 31-yard run to the 2, which Gainesville was able to power in for a touchdown. And then in drive number 5, Dylan Riley a 63-yard run, and then Max Madsen finally able to find Caples and get a touchdown out of it. And then then after an underthrow that should have been a touchdown to Bates, is only about a 26-yard pass, Dylan Riley steps up and saves the day, kind of bails Max Madsen out. Should have been a touchdown, but Dylan Riley says ball doesn't lie. He runs it in for a 49-yard score. Brilliant, brilliant play. So first half trend was passing game, Keeley, Max Madsen, continuing that struggling that we have seen through the last few games, but the running game finally, something that we haven't necessarily seen stepping up in this way, especially not necessarily first half, actually stepping up and making up for those errors. However, in the second half, and also in that first half, brilliant play call, the one I was referencing from Cam Bates. Potter calling a great game, understanding that the passing game is struggling a little bit, leaning into the running game, which stepped up in the way that he wanted to, including going to wide receivers. A brilliantly called end around. They've ran this with Cam Bates before, but this was a very different wrinkle where they set it up like it's going to be a pitch to the running back. The formation looks very much, I believe it's Dylan Riley in the background, looks very much like they are going to pitch to the running back, which they also have done. And instead, just as they're about to pitch, they push it forward to the wide receiver coming around, who's then able to, or sorry, I guess that was backwards, but pushes it backwards to the wide receiver instead coming around, who runs it to the left side for a touchdown. And he was basically great blocking downfield, but basically wide open once he did that. And so first half, great play calling, but primarily on the running game. In the second half for Boise State, first drive, certainly flat. After that, though, Marshall has that incredible catch. Max Madsen, you can see he changes a little bit in how he plays out the rest of the game after he realizes that the guys around him are stepping up. Really brilliantly called screen pass to Gaines. A delayed screen, looked like it was going to be a rollout throw to the right, which they'd done pretty much the entire game. And instead, and Gaines is just standing there blocking, and then he turns, throw the balls to him, and he is just, again, wide open. The entire offense is rolling right, and then delayed screen back to the left. Brilliant play call by the offensive coordinator. And then Max Madsen scrambles for 25 yards. He has a great pass to Cam Bates, who makes a really nice catch. It wasn't necessarily a super high pass, but he did have to climb the ladder a little bit to get it, but he makes a nice catch, runs it down for 25 yards, and then Max Madsen on a roll right finds a wide open Chris Marshall. It was a really good route tree as well. Got the tight end in the way of the DBs. Marshall opened a great laser directly to him, and then he is able to go on for another 15 yards for the touchdown. And then drive number 4, Dylan Riley breaks out for a nice 27-yard run. They extend the drive with a fake punt, which we'll talk about when we get to the special teams. And then Malik Sherrod has a touchdown on a wheel route. Again, a very, very good play call overall. Wide open. Max Madsen hits him and a touchdown. So this is an offense overall for Boise State that had a great running performance in the first half, a great passing performance in the second half, and just a great game overall. Overall for this offense, 56 points, almost 600 yards of total offense, 558. Exactly the kind of performance you wanted to see. They put up 28 points in both halves of this game. Started off strong, but then also finished the game the right way. And I think you saw a little bit of Max Madsen starting to get that edge back when in his scrambling, in his passes, the confidence. You are starting to see, and even the throw to Marshall was a really good throw against very tight coverage, but where only his guy could go make a play on the ball. I'm not saying that all the answers have been answered for Max Madsen. He still has a lot to prove. I think that he's showing he can win games this year, but he has still a lot to prove to show if he can be the quarterback for 2026. That is not a discussion that's now off the table. That still has a validity that needs to be addressed throughout the rest of the year. Like I said, every single game, the rest of the way out, is a playoff game for his own job. He is competing against himself to show that he, to the fans, and more keenly to this coaching staff, that he is what they say he is, which he is the only quarterback in the country. They've expanded from the Mountain West, in the country, that they would want on this roster. That is a high statement. He showed some of that today. He has a lot more to prove, but overall, this was a great performance by these receivers, stepping up, actually getting open, which they've struggled to do in the past. Max Madsen putting the ball overall accurately. Obviously, that first interception, a little high on the screen, was deflected. So, there's that factor as well, but it was too high for a screen pass. Should have been in the belly or lower for the receiver. Only give your receiver the opportunity on the screen, on the, not screen, sorry, it's a slant, on the slant coming across. So there were some mistakes, but he made pretty much all of his mistakes in the first half and showed the ability to rebound from that, have the short mindset, and keep going one play at a time into the second half, where he actually got a lot of his moxie back, which I think should give fans a lot of confidence and excitement going forward the rest of the year. So overall, for this offense, I believe this is the first time that we've done this. Gonna give them an A+. This is the Boise State offense we wanted to see coming into this year, and it is exciting to see everyone, Keeley, the offensive coordinator, hitting their stride through the rest of the year. This, I think, is going to be a Boise State team that should get better as the year wears on, and that's going to be perfect timing for when they start hitting the hardest teams. UNLV was one of them, but hitting the hardest teams on their schedule. This is the kind of offense we're going to need the rest of the way out. So let's hope that this wasn't just a flash in the pan. Don't rest on those laurels. Keep on pressing, but overall, fantastic offensive performance. Now, defensively, yeah, they gave up a ton of yards, okay? This is when you may have kind of questioned a little bit in the beginning when I said this was a really good defensive performance. And yeah, 476 yards of total offense given up. And that's a Boise State team. You know, UNLV, you expect that. UNLV gives up a lot of yardage defensively. I was listening to Jason, who came on for the preview. Awesome podcaster. I'll put a link to his channel in this again because you should go back and watch his reaction to this game. It's really, really good, really well thought out. But Jason Kelly, the Let's Run podcast, his review, he said he doesn't even think that this UNLV defense should be considered a top 150th including FCS programs. Like, shouldn't even be considered a top defense in the FCS. And so, yes, this UNLV defense that you expect them to give up a lot of yards. It's not necessarily a Boise State defense you expect to do that. They've only averaging coming into this game 331 yards per game. And so, yeah, a uncharacteristic performance giving up 476 yards. But I want you to think of a couple things when you look at this overall. Yes, 476 yards, 72 of those yards came on the very last drive versus the backup. So it's not quite as bad. Still more than the average overall. It's still, just over 400, but it's not that almost 500 yards when you consider the starters. They pulled their starters for the last drive. UNLV scored their only touchdown in the second half in that last drive and had 72 yards of total offense, long run, long pass. That was against the backups. However, even if you consider 476 yards in total, Boise State only gave up 4 third down completions or conversions. 4 of 13 on third down conversions. 30% conversion percentage on third downs. And they didn't give up any fourth downs. They only attempted 1 fourth down, which is another thing Jason was pointing out in his review show, is that really surprising that they didn't go for more fourth down attempts, especially later in the game when it was kind of getting out of hand a little bit. But regardless, Boise State stopped the 1 fourth down attempt and only gave up 4 third down. Yeah, UNLV had 22 first downs in this game. They put up a lot of yards, but when it mattered, this Boise State defense bowed up. And also, in the second half, this was not the same defense performance as the first half. In the first half, Boise State, they gave up 267 yards of offense, and overall, I'm getting ahead of myself here, and overall, the score in the first half was 24 points. So 24 points and 267 yards of total offense in the first half, okay? That trend did not continue into the second half. I've talked about last year specifically how Chenander is just a genius when it comes to second half adjustments. And I know we use that term a bit on the show, mostly because the coaches use it when they talk about who Nate Potter is, who Max Matson is. But I don't necessarily call people a genius a lot unless I truly mean it. And Eric Chenander is a adjustments genius. Last year, second halves, you really saw it. This season, secondary-wise, this is incredible what this secondary has done. Going from 85th or 85th overall in the country after the Air Force game to where they were coming into this matchup where they were 32nd overall. Incredible performance. Even in this game versus a UNLV offense who's very, very good. I mean, their quarterback is amazing. He's probably the best quarterback in the Mountain West. And in this game, they held him to only 215 yards passing. Now, it's not a career low. They broke their career low streak. They'd held 3 quarterbacks back-to-back career low games. It wasn't a career low. It's not even one of his worst of the season. I think it's like middle of the road for him overall for games in the season. But they stepped up against a very good quarterback, only really allowed 1 drive with long passing attempts. After that, they held him. The corners were incredible. So great job overall stepping up the secondary. But first half versus second half, adjustments, right? So Eric Chenander has done a great job this season making adjustments after the first 3 games. Incredible. But we haven't necessarily seen just the night and day adjustments first half to second half. In this game, you did. You saw that same genius that we saw last year. 267 yards of total offense and 24 points. Before the starters were pulled in this game, In the second half, they only allowed 137 yards of offense and 0 points. A game that was a 4-point spread coming into the second half became a blowout because the offense kept doing what it was doing in the first half. It kind of switched roles, quarterback got better, but the defense dominated in the second half. They didn't do what they were doing in the first half, which was giving up some big plays. They became much more consistent. Now, did they still give up big plays? Yeah, of course they did. But when it mattered, they bowed up and stopped UNLV time and time and time and time again. Only one touchdown allowed, and it was against the backups in the second half. This defense for Boise State, I could not be more impressed. I have been, in all of my reviews, most consistently, I have been the most terrified versus UNLV. When you look at my reviews going back this year and last year, we played UNLV twice. Yeah, last year, UNLV, besides Oregon, obviously, scared me the most out of any team that we played because they had a quarterback that fit the best against our weakness. That's the same case here. I know it's a different quarterback. It's an entirely different team. They have almost no returning starters. But even though it's a different quarterback, the Calandria coming over from UVA, this still scared me more than really any other besides Notre Dame and maybe USF. Mountain West-wise, this scared me more than any other offense we're going to face. And Boise State's defense stepped up in a big way. Now, they still allowed almost 100 yards rushing for Calandria. He had his moments. But overall, in this game, 267 yards the first half. Total in this game, 476. 102 yards rushing in the first half, 261 the second half. That's where UNLV really got their moments, mostly from the quarterback run game. But again, stepping up strong. 165 yards passing in the first half, only 215 yards total passing in this game. So 102 yards rushing in the first half, finished with 261. 165 yards passing in the first half, finished with 215. So Boise State overall in this game, stepping up and shutting down the passing game overall in the second half. And mostly that was because UNLV kept going after the deep ball. They must have watched a ton of Boise State tape from like 4 or 5 weeks ago because they identified that as a supposed weakness, but it was not. And it was against the players that have been maligned Irby. Irby had several times where he was targeted. So that potentially was a weakness that UNLV identified. Several times where he was targeted and he was in perfect position. Multiple overthrows forced by Calandria here because the Boise State DBs were in the perfect position. Not to mention the fact that, of course, McCoy had a pick six, about a 60-yard return, pick six touchdown as well in this matchup. The secondary, I cannot say enough praise. I cannot put up enough praise towards the job that the coaching staff, whether it's DeMar Warren or Chenander, whoever is, maybe it's Spencer Danielson kind of getting in the mix as well. The combined coaching staff overall making the adjustments they have on this secondary that looked like they were going to be one of the worst in the conference coming into the first 3 or so games of the season, what they have done. And I was hesitant to put something out on Twitter again before this game. I wanted the Horseshoe Collective is doing this awesome live review show, and they asked for comments. And I really encourage you all to go onto their Twitter, go to Horseshoe Collective. I'll put a link to their Twitter in this review. They don't sponsor me. The Horseshoe Spirits is separate from the collective as far as the sponsorship. So I want to make that clear. Horseshoe Collective is not an endorser of this channel, but I'm an endorser of theirs unofficially. They do a fantastic job. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to go on, and they sent out a tweet, about 24 hours before the game saying, hey, in the comments, put things you'd want answered on our show. And then it's like Jay Cutler and Tyreek Jones, I think, and put, comments that you want answered on the show. And something I wanted to put was, what do you guys think is the main reason for the incredible performance overall, improvement by this Boise State secondary? And I didn't, because I was concerned that this was going to be the game that proved the rule, right? That disrupted the great performance, and it didn't. This Boise State secondary absolutely showed up. Now, did they struggle with tackling? Yes. That is, when you look at things that need to be fixed and worked on, first half performances for the passing game, Max Madsen needs to be more consistent throughout the game. Offense, that's what they need to work on. For the defense, the tackling was almost USF at times. It was atrocious in moments. Now, again, they stopped, they allowed these long runs in between where they couldn't tackle, and then somehow, second and third down, they were a brick wall. So, the adjustments that in the moment need to be made were made. But Boise State's tackling consistently throughout the season has been a real Achilles for them, and they definitely need to work on that. So, yes, tackling was still weak, but as far as positioning, defenders being in the right spot, the right play calls by the defense overall to put the right amount of pressure, but also not to leave the secondary so vulnerable that they get exploited, all of that was on full display in this game. The only drive Calandra really had anything going passing-wise was drive number 6, had a 27-yard pass, and that really wasn't on the secondary because it was actually a mismatch. They'd been able to get a linebacker, so Phelps was out there on a receiver. Benefield's not able to get over in time, and it's a long touchdown. Oh, not a long touchdown, a long pass. And then they had a 35-yard touchdown, which was a really good catch right between Mickey and Benefield. Kind of lost the ball a little bit. Good drive, okay? Had a couple mistakes. You're never going to be perfect. You're going to continue to make mistakes, and that was on that drive. But overall, that was it. That was it for pretty much the entire game as far as deep passing was allowed. And that right there, that's 27 and 35. So that's again, quick plug math, 50, 62 yards of passing overall. Well, he had 215 yards of passing. So third or whatever that is, most of that coming on one single drive for him, and then he stayed around in the game for the very last drive, and a lot of that was through the air. So most of his offense, his passing offense, coming on one drive with a lot of broken plays, and then against the backups. And overall, this Boise State secondary held strong. Incredible performances, opening up the game dominant. Notriani with a 7-yard sack. Boise State didn't have a ton of sacks in this game. That's something they haven't been dominant on coming into this. Only 61st in the nation in total sacks from a program that was number 1 to number 3 overall last year. Certainly a step backwards as far as that goes. So something they still need to work on, but against a very mobile quarterback, a quarterback who had almost 100 yards rushing, and he even had more than that if you count in the sack yardage, against a very, very mobile quarterback, agile quarterback who gets the ball out quickly, they still had 3 sacks, and they started off with a negative 7-yard sack by Notriani. This is clearly the second game in a row, because he did the same thing versus New Mexico, where he came in and he influenced a play, and he ended up recovering a fumble. Notriani is starting these games off strong, and really, again, I've loved what I've seen out of him stepping up, trying to replace the absence of Simpson from last year. You needed someone as a leader to step up on the defense. He kind of struggled a little bit the first few games being that leader defensively, but he has played so well here the backstretch of the season, and again, starting off strong. And then Mickey on third down pass breakup. What a boost Mickey is. I don't know if him playing versus Notre Dame would have changed results, because I don't think we lost that game because of our defense. I thought our defense played really, really well. The main reason we lost that game was the 4 interceptions on offense. Offense not being able to do anything. So I don't think it would have changed anything per se, but maybe we could have held it to within like 14 points or something. I mean, one of those touchdowns was on Banks. And so Mickey in this season, what an incredible job he's done this season, but in this game, amazing performance. He was all over the field making tackles. He had a couple plays on him as well, but overall, all over the field making tackles for loss. He had in this game 7 tackles, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and a pass defended as well. One of those was a big pass defended, like that third down pass breakup, just start the game off. That was how Boise State established the momentum and energy, really, until a muff special teams moment, which we'll cover here when we get to special teams. Boise State controlled all the momentum in this game. Then they allowed, again, just like last week, a special teams moment allows the other team to get back into the game, and then Boise State has to fight and then recover. It was very, very similar in a lot of ways to what Boise State did last week versus New Mexico, except more impressive because it's UNLV and not New Mexico. But overall, Boise State defensively really establishing things. The first 2 drives were fantastic. Mickey's name written down here twice. Great coverage on a deep pass. He had a tackle for loss on a wide receiver screen, forcing the punt. And then drive number 3, they ended up getting a field goal out of it, but amazing just deflection on that third down as well. And overall, in that first half, yes, they allowed them to come back into the game with the special teams. Couldn't really do much about that, and they did allow some big play moments. Calandria had a couple of big runs. On that field goal, he had a 10-yard run and then a defensive holding penalty as well, and also an unsportsmanlike call. And so this is a problem for Boise State. We've seen it all year long, the undisciplined nature of the team. But I will say that it seemed like Senator Danielson was doing something about it this week, because when Samari McCoy had that unsportsmanlike penalty, which Boise State's had, I'm pretty sure, an unsportsmanlike penalty almost every single game. They certainly had one last week. I believe it was on Jaden Virgin Morgan. After he had that unsportsmanlike penalty, they pulled him from the game for a little bit, and they didn't let him come back in until a little bit later. And so, fans have been wanting that kind of tougher love, and that seems to be somewhat on the table a little bit now. But yes, some penalties and some muffed punt stuff gives them some opportunities. They go down, they score. Drive number 6, of course, those big long passes. Then really the first truly long run allowed by Calandra, 27-yard touchdown. But then after that, Boise State did something in drive number 7, which they showed as a trend going into the second half as well. Because 27-yard run, right? Those long runs between the 20s. But then Mickey, I think it was the next play after that, or the second play after, I think they might have had a passing completion, comes up and has a negative 12-yard sack. Huge play. That was the kind of playmaking that Boise State had in this game. They would allow some big plays on offense, but then they also would get their own big plays back on defense, whether it was a tackle for a loss, whether it was a huge sack, whether it was a massive pass breakup, whether it was an interception. Boise State did what they needed to in this game to have that, quintessential bend but don't break. When you give up almost 500 yards of offense, but then only allow 4 third downs, that is perfect bend but don't break. And while they weren't consistent overall at it in the first half, again, that's when UNLV got pretty much all of their points in the first half. Also had a really long touchdown on a screen that had like 3 tackles missed overall, including Mickey missing a tackle on that play as well. And then they go down, they're able to score a touchdown off the blitz. After that first half, while they had their really started off dominant, and then they let UNLV get back in and get all that momentum, and they didn't have necessarily that answer in the first half for the big play. Okay, so the UNLV still was able to go down and score. Whether it was a field goal or a couple of touchdowns, they were able to get their own back after the big plays in the first half. In the second half, UNLV still had big plays. We talk about 102 yards rushing in the first half, 261 total in this game, so 160 or 159 yards rushing in the second half. That UNLV was still making big explosive plays, but they weren't then turning those into points because Boise State did the perfect bend but don't break in that second half. Perfect example, drive number 1. A missed tackles allows a 9-yard gain, and it should have been about a 2 or 3 yard run, and instead turns into a 9-yard gain. But then Boise State stops Thomas on third down on a pass that maybe he should have gone upfield a little bit, but they stretch him out. Breaks a couple of tackles, but they force a punt on drive number 1. And then drive number 2, they have 2 really good coverage, just all over the wide receiver, deep coverage forced, a overthrow there by Irby, and the Notriani and Latu combining for a negative 9-yard sack. And then Calandria, this is more along the lines of what I'm talking about, long big play, but then making up for it. They allow a 28-yard run, but then a couple plays later, interception, pick 6 by McCoy. Broken tackles, 3 Boise State defenders allow a first down. The 3 Boise State defenders plows right through them. They allow a long 37-yard run, and then great pass defense, a negative 2-yard sack, and then great coverage on fourth down, again by Mickey, forcing a turnover on downs. And again, until you get into drive number 8, where they, at that point, overall in the game, but when you get into that point, then obviously that's where they had the backups in. But Boise State's defense played incredible in this game. Now, was it a perfect performance? No. Terrible tackling pretty much throughout, except for when it mattered, and also that undisciplined nature, specifically looking at the penalties. But overall, for this Boise State defense, an incredible job of stepping up in the way that it mattered, specifically on those third downs, on those fourth downs, in the red zone. And overall, I'm going to give this a solid A- performance for this Boise State defense. Now, Boise State special teams. What a roller coaster. Always is, right? I said this last week. I said, I don't think we're going to see a single game. I just want one game where we have a consistent special teams performance, where they do one good thing at least, and then have no net negatives. So I would accept neutral with a general positive overall. And that just has not happened. For Boise State overall in this game, they muffed 2 punts. They lost one of them. But after the first muff, that really should have been a talking point. They send Stroud out again. He muffs the second punt. That leads directly to a touchdown for UNLV. All right. Comes out then in the second half. First half, disasters on special teams. Second half, incredible performance on special teams. A 40-yard return, kick return. Sherrod gets his moxie back. 40-yard kick return. After a half, he's been able to settle down. Kind of what they should have done after the first muff. They let him settle down, and then he is able to go out and make up for the mistakes with a 40-yard return. Doyles extends a drive with a fake punt pass. This is now the second game in a row that Doyles has completed a pass. Remember last week he was the holder on the muffed field goal attempt, ended up picking up and throwing a touchdown. You will be interested to know, at least I was, because I love stats and all that kind of thing. I went back and I looked at every single Boise State season going all the way back to 1996, so the entire FBS history. There is not one time in the Boise State history as an FBS program that they have had a punter complete a pass in back-to-back games. This is a historic moment, just like Dylan Rise, 200 plus yards, historic moment. Historic moment. Oscar Doyle completes a pass becoming the first Boise State punter in their FBS history to complete a pass in back-to-back games. It was a great play call. So, Stacey Collins, he is at fault for allowing allowing Malik Sherrod to muff that second punt. That should have been a coachable moment there where you sit him for one and then let him go back in. Boise State used to do that even when they had great punt returners. If George Hawley looked a little bit mixed up back there, they'd put somebody else out in for punt return. So I don't know if that they just literally don't have anybody else they trust to catch a punt, which would be a really bad place to be. And again, a reflection on special teams coaching overall. But for whatever reason, they didn't make the adjustments they needed to. Well, Stacey Collins, he had a really strong second half. He has had a terrible season as a special teams coordinator because special teams have had a terrible season overall. But in the second half, he had allowed Sherrod a 40-yard return, allowed him to get out there and do it, and he did it. And he also, he designed a good blocking scheme, 40-yard return. And then he called a brilliant fake punt, 11-yard throw. Obviously, Austin always has these rollouts where he looks like he could run it. Well, he threw it to Louder, 11-yard pass, using that skill set. These Aussie punters are so underutilized because they play Australian rules football where they're, hitting the ball off their hands and they're going up and catching kicks and using that as like a pass. And there's some weird rules out there in Australian football, and they're not just punters. They're not just guys that just go out and kick every day. They are athletes. They are true athletes. I know that you don't always think about punters and kickers as athletes, but punters, specifically Australian punters, are true quintessential athletes because they're the punters are like the best players, like the quarterbacks of these teams in Australia. And so they have a lot of skills that gets underutilized in the American football rule system. And it's great to be able to start seeing those skills sprinkled in. Great call by Stacey Collins. I even give props to his dude. We are going to always be 100% fair on this channel. We will criticize negatively, backed up by facts and evidence. We're not just going to speak off of emotion. We're backing up by facts and evidence and overall trends, not single points of failure. But at the same time, if there's positives, which there's always positives and negatives, we're going to speak to those as well. And so great job, Stacey Collins. And then good, also Louder recovered a onside kick by UNLV. So great performance overall in the second half. First half, though, my goodness, just a roller coaster. And Sherrod has struggled in the punt returns. He's had some nice moments, but he's also had several muffs. This was not his first game with muffs. In a couple of games previously where he had not lost a punt return yet, but he had a couple where he had muffed them and was able to get back on it and get the ball. And unfortunately, in this case, didn't. And it was another one of those examples, just like last week, where Boise State allows a long 100-yard kick return. It changes the momentum, gives New Mexico a chance. The exact same thing here. That muff punt return in their own red zone allows UNLV to go score a touchdown, gets it within 4 points, and then that's how they end the half. They score. They get that momentum and that energy back, and they are able to push through the rest of the game, and at least through that first half. And that was all based on that one single point of failure in this case from the missed muff punt return. That is a major issue because special teams keep being the thing that gets in Boise State's way. I've said this before coming into this game, I said the biggest opponent on this field for Boise State when they play UNLV will be Boise State. Whether they can play discipline and do what we know they're capable of. Well, they stepped up overall in this matchup, but they're still getting their own way. They're still stubbing their own toes, and it goes through pretty consistently in the special teams, allowing those huge momentum energy type plays. That is not going to continue to work out in your favor. It already hasn't. One of the reasons Boise State lost versus USF, huge momentum play, allowing a touchdown pass versus USF. Now, Notre Dame wasn't necessarily a special teams fault, but they have already lost a game because of special teams. And if they don't want to lose another one, whether it be not necessarily consistently failing, but just those one individual moments that allow huge opportunities overall and momentum change, they have got to buckle down and fix this. Boise State has fixed their secondary, okay? They have fixed their defense overall. The wide receivers are getting fixed. The passing game is starting to fix itself. The running game, very much fixed. All of these things Boise State has that came in that they were struggling with, the multiple holding calls and penalties. The Boise State didn't really struggle with penalties in this game overall. All the things that they've struggled at, they've been able to fix. But the one thing they have not been able to fix yet this season consistently is the special teams. Outstanding job in the second half, but that has got to stop being an issue for Boise State. And I speak to that not just as someone who likes to see perfection throughout, and it's never going to get to that level, but you hold that to that standard. So not just as somebody who wants Boise State special teams to be good, but I'm talking as a Boise State fan. Boise State fans, we should take the most, Boise State as a university should take the most pride in the special teams. That's what Boise State was. You go back and you look at the golden era of Boise State, it was a privilege. The starters were trying to fight to get onto special teams. It was an honor. Ian Johnson played on special teams. He was going up and, returning punts, obviously, but also going up as like an up man and blocking, not as an up man, but going up and blocking punts. And so, same thing with Kyle Wilson and all of these guys. And so Boise State built their brand on just incredible, just really put together, build your blue collar work ethic hat right there on special teams. And that is not the level that the last couple of years has been, and even going past that, last few years, that is not what Boise State has held themselves to standard wise. And so if I'm tough on the special teams, it is because they deserve it, because there are issues, but it's also because I don't just hold Boise State special teams to like, okay, that's just another unit you can figure out about. Special teams for Boise State on the history of this institution should be elite, and they're not, and that is a problem. So overall for Boise State, offense, defense, special teams, I didn't grade the special teams. Overall for Boise State special teams, it's a really hard one to grade because they played really well. Punting, Oscar Doyle, not just was he passing the ball, but he was using his leg as well. 3 punts for 45.3 yard average and 1 inside the 20. Overall, I'm going to give the special teams, because they were able to fix some things. They only had the one major error, a B- overall, but they have some major things to clean up. One thing I forgot to cover, and this goes more to the coaching overall, so it's all right that I didn't cover it in the offense. Before I talk about the keys to the game, and I know I'm already at 50 minutes, so I'll be done here pretty soon. One thing I do want to cover that I don't want to get swept under the rug was the decision-making by Spencer Downson and Potter, whoever it was who was controlling it, the clock management by the coaching staff at the end of the first half. Boise State got the ball back with about 45 seconds or so on the clock, 2 timeouts. Dylan Riley is having the game of his life, over 160-something yards in the first half. He only touched the ball like 5 or so times, and he is just dominating. He is having these huge explosive plays. When they run it on the first down, he gets 6 yards. I know that Max Madison is not having his best first half, and you're going against the wind, and you don't want to risk it. I'm not saying you go out and do something dumb, okay? I'm not saying that you go and air the ball out. Don't give UNLV any more momentum that they already have. I'm not saying that, okay? But Dylan Riley has shown the ability to be explosive. He's already had 2 long runs in the first half for you. Why not just give the ball to Dylan Riley a few times? The first run was 6 yards. You can probably get a first down. You got 2 plays to do it. You don't necessarily have to burn your timeouts yet, but you got 2 time. Get to about 15, 20 seconds left, and then let him run 1 and burn a timeout. Then run 1 and burn a timeout. Maybe you're in field goal range. Who knows? You don't have to throw the ball. Just hand it off to Dylan Riley, 4 or 5 times and see where you go. Just to completely, in a game this close, it was 4 points in the first half, this close, where you need every opportunity, not using your timeouts there, not using a proven, if Dylan Riley or the Boise State running game, if they'd had like less than 100 yards rushing in the first half and weren't going anywhere, and you knew they weren't doing the offensive lane, you're just like, that's just a 5 I'm going to have, that's fine. That's not the case. That's not the case here. And Dylan Riley got stuffed, a 2-yard loss on the first play. Okay, well, we just take it. But he had a pretty good run, 6 yards. You can do something with that. I did not understand at all. It has been one of the elements of Spencer Johnson's game, obviously a young head coach that he is still working on. The clock management, I remember just being terrible versus UCLA when they played them in the bowl game. Last week, I forgot to cover it in my review video, but versus New Mexico, they had New Mexico back at the 2-yard line, okay? 2-yard line, and New Mexico had to kind of do like a bunch formation, and they got them for a negative yard loss on that formation. Maybe they took a knee. But either way, they're right there at the goal line, inside the 2-yard line, in a wet conditions. You got 2 timeouts, I believe. Use your timeouts. You're right there at the goal line. Now, UNLV is in the middle of the field at 20, something. Okay, fine, let it go to half. They're right there at the goal line. Maybe the quarterback trips and it's a safety. Maybe the ball is fumbled and you land on it for a touchdown. Or maybe they get so close to that goal line on the second play, you got another timeout to use, that now they're going to snap it into the end zone and you can go tackle them for a loss. That moved forward as a trend into this game when you had the same, in a different circumstance, but same just fuzzling clock management by this coaching staff. Still something that Spencer Johnson needs to work on. Should be a point of emphasis. So many positives to take from this game. Positive specialists, positive defense, positive offense, positive from the coaching staff. Yes, but there are some issues that Boise State needs to find ways to work on that could end up hurting them later on down the season if they're not able to have as dominant second halves as they have already so far. All right, final thoughts here. Let's look at the and I kind of talked about the magnitude of this game already at the beginning, so we'll probably just kind of do these keys and then wrap it up here. Key number one, stop the quarterback. Now, yeah, they allowed him all over the place. He had almost 100 yards rushing, 215 yards passing, and a passing touchdown. He was all over the place. Most of that coming on a couple of drives. But yeah, he had a lot of yards. But Boise State overall did not allow themselves to get destroyed by this quarterback. They really overall, consistently, when it mattered, held this quarterback in check. And so I'm going to give this a solid B. That was a huge part of the reason for Boise State's win in this one. Don't beat yourself. They had a couple bad moments. The special teams, the unsportsmanlike conduct call, all of those things. Interception, obviously. But they found a way to come over that. And in the second half, the reason they were so dominant is they stopped doing those things. And so overall, for Boise State in this one, I'm going to give them a B plus A. You know what? I'll be kind. I'm going to give this an A minus because I do think they had a really dominant overall job in the second half where they weren't beating themselves up. And then Madsen take the lead. First half certainly struggled in this role. Second half, though, he stepped up in the way that he needed to get this team not just a win, but a dominant win overall. So I'm going to give this also an A minus. This was the kind of game he needed. Not necessarily the fans are still going to have questions there. He needed to go out and throw for like 400 something yards to have a brilliant, perfect performance to start to regain the fan base. But when it comes to showing confidence for him this season and also in himself building up that momentum and energy and confidence, he needs, again, the perfect type of game to be able to overcome first half struggles and finish strong. He finished stronger this week than he did last week. First half struggles last week, second half struggles last week, but he finished strong, is more consistent, and he had a great last drive. This game, first half struggles, but second half was mostly perfect. Was overall pretty much perfect for Max Madsen in the second half. Yeah, he missed a wide open not Jean-Ray Dubar, who actually played in this game, so that's great that he might be coming back and being available again. Malik Stroud, Mr. Wide Open Malik Stroud, also something we didn't cover. There's still some issues that Max Madsen's working through, but overall in the second half, he stepped up and played much, much better in this game overall. I think should give the fan base some confidence in him and what he's capable of doing at least this year. So overall for this Boise State team, big one next week again. They have a lot that they need to step up into, but I think that they are going to start to gain back a little bit of that spotlight. Certainly when it comes to the Mountain West. I think a lot of people just wrote them off and they were looking to UNLV and some other teams, at least nationally, as far as being the winner of the Mountain West. Well, Boise State, they are doing exactly what they need to do. They're winning the big games, and at the same time, they have now, I think, established themselves as, again, as usual, that team to beat in the Mountain West, right where you want to be as a Boise State fan. Playoffs, who knows? Memphis, I believe they lost today to ULB. Obviously, UNLV losing. There's chaos out there. Who knows what will happen to Boise State at the end of this year? But the number one thing that's in their sights and still in their control is that Mountain West championship game. And that alone, regardless of what happens outside of this, would be a massive feather in Boise State's cap to be able to finish this year, to finish off their last season in the Mountain West with a Mountain West championship win that they can then carry on into their next year and first year in the new Pac-12. All of that's still on the table, and after this game, I think you have a lot more confidence about Boise State being able to go out and achieve that goal. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe. Make sure you check out Horseshoe Spirits Liqueurs. Again, any liquor store in the Southwest of Idaho should have it. It must be 21 or older to consume. If they don't have it, ask for it by name, and they should be able to get it for you. Again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe. A lot to be excited about going forward. And as always, go Big Blue!